When it comes to the definition of that libertarian, if you're part of the Libertarian Party movement, maybe in the past year or so, it's been, well, a little overused. On one level, anyone who's been willing to take the time and energy and extend themselves from their personal life out of that sort of comfort zone that most people exist in politically and become a libertarian, well, you actually are that libertarian. But there are a few cases that really transcend that, and our next guest clearly does. I'm happy and proud to introduce you for the very first time on the Coalition airwaves, Kim Ruff. She is, I believe, the first to really announce that they're not just dipping their toes in the water, that she's running for the presidency of the United States for the Libertarian Party nomination. She joins us, I believe she's in Arizona tonight. Correct me if I'm wrong. But she joins us really to talk about the movement, the philosophy, and a little bit of the practical political side. The Libertarian movement has had quite a storied history when it comes to presidential candidates. There is the, and by the way, if you're not a Libertarian, you'll see that we use the term Libertarian on just about everything. In the past, we've had celebritarian candidates, and those are people who are celebrities in their own right and kind of libertarian, and we run them with kind of the hope that, well, somehow they'll win. On the other hand, we've had a number of Republican-like candidates. Some of my best friends are Liberty Republicans. But as a libertarian who's aggressively and proudly a radical libertarian, both of the large L and small L variety, I believe that it's time to move away from libertarian apologists, libertarian celebrities. I believe the time has come for someone to hold the title of nominated candidate for the President of the United States, as well as Vice President, who fits clearly under the mantra as someone who's intelligent, articulate, and most importantly, clearly capable in an accessible, mature way of explaining to people, bringing to people, addressing people with what I call the libertarian message. The message of self-ownership, independence, the message of representing the ultimate minority, the individual. The message of freedom from an oppressive government, the message of freedom from a government that seeks to occupy a nanny-like role in your family. I could go on and on about the libertarian movement. But at this juncture in our history, it is critical that we once and for all proudly stand up and say, damn it, I'm a libertarian. And I'm a libertarian for this reason. And I'm a libertarian who believes in this. And it's not something I'm embarrassed about. It's not something I'm looking to sidestep. It's not something I'm looking to marginalize. I'm a libertarian. Deal with it. And I'm here to reach the highest levels of government so that I can leave you the hell alone. Someone who I believe epitomizes that, who's an active member of the radical movement, and I believe can bring to this country that message clearly and squarely, is Kim Ruff. And welcome again to the Coalition for the very first time.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a real joy to be here.
No, it's so let's sort of, what I like to do with folks who are, I call them libertarian fabulous. That's my term. It's never really caught on. It's kind of like felching, right, from a certain movie. It's never really caught on, but I like it. So as someone who is overtly libertarian fabulous, what I always like to ask you was, what was that moment in your life? Because we've all got that hallelujah moment where the light suddenly shines on and we get it. And then we realize kind of how screwed we are, but we get it. What was your libertarian moment?
That's a very good question. And I think everybody's origin story is always really fascinating because it really kind of points to how we should cater our messaging, depending on how we shifted. But for me, I am in Arizona. You are not incorrect about that. I was raised in a Reagan Republican household in a Barry Goldwater state. So we already had classical liberal ideology, classical conservatism. Mm-hmm. And then my father is a small business owner. So there was a conflation of factors with him being a small business owner, on his recommendation reading Atlas Shrugged, seeing firsthand how the copper industry was negatively impacted by government regulation, and then the parallel in the book. That was one aspect that led itself to me being frustrated with the current state and climate of affairs. The other aspect that really pushed me away from the GOP was the fact that we had the war on terror. There were we had shifted from classical conservatism, and then under Reagan we went to more of a Christian conservatism where we were starting to legislate morality. And then under Bush we had neocons who were very hawkish and offensive in their war efforts, and that was a major turnoff for me, and that was the shift. That's why I ended up, I was grousing to a buddy of mine about politics, and he said that he looked at the Libertarian Party. So I looked online at the platform and I read what they had to say and their stance on things, and I'm like, oh my God, these are my people, and I switched party affiliation then. So that was pretty much the backstory on me.
No, and that's the common thread. There's this sort of moment where your jaw just drops a little, and your eyes go wide, and it's like that first political love. You say, "Where have you been?" I mean, I always like to when I address our group here in Rhode Island, our hardy little band of libertarians, I always like to open up with, "Hi, my name is Pat. I was a neocon," and everybody stands up and goes, "Hi, Pat." And because I worked in the World Trade Center on and off part time for close to 15 years. I lost personal friends of mine on 9/11. I happened to be in Midtown the first time it was attacked, and the natural reaction was to jump in your pickup, tie that big American flag to the back, drive around, and get me some, it'd basically be a racist jerk, without really understanding the fundamentals, say, for example, that led to the single largest terror attack in American history. It's complicated, and it's not really what I'm here to talk about tonight, but I think there are a lot of us who came either from that or came from the Ron Paul movement. And we saw what happened to Ron Paul, as the mainstream parties did whatever they could to marginalize his successes, including a certain senator-elect who now is whose name has been mentioned. What's his first name? Willard? Yeah, Willard's been mentioned as a possible candidate. And I think before stuff like that even happens, this is me saying this, not you, we need to remind people that a variety of the Republican-like candidates who would offer themselves to us were part and parcel of the jihad that was taken against the Liberty Republican movement, in the last 10 years. We cannot let people forget that.
Right.
What's it mean to you to be a libertarian? What in different aspects of your life, and what issues do you hold nearest and dear?
It's interesting. I just started reading this book. I can't think of the gentleman's name, but it's Real Heroes, and he's the director of FEE. Mm-hmm. And he was talking about how without good character, there is no liberty. And I actually think that would be the best way to summarize my viewpoints on libertarianism. It isn't just a political ideology. It isn't just a social ideology or even a philosophy, as they sometimes like to claim. It is an overarching viewpoint that affects all aspects of your life, and it comes down to character. If you own yourself, you have personal responsibility, and in that personal responsibility comes a great duty to engage and interact with your fellow man in a way that exemplifies good character. So integrity and ethics are huge for me, and that translates across everything: how I conduct myself as a mother, how I am in relationships with my friends and family, how I am at work. Ethics and integrity are huge.
Explain to folks who, to me what's fascinating now is everybody's a libertarian. Everybody's a libertarian. A lot of people have no idea what a libertarian is, but damn it, they're a libertarian. Explain to folks the importance of the NAP. What is the NAP?
Well, the non-aggression principle is essentially this. It's the acknowledgement that you have the natural rights to life, liberty, and justly acquired property. Property being defined as your body and the fruits of your labor. You have the right to exercise those liberties howsoever you see fit, provided that you do not infringe on the rights of others. Mm-hmm. That's part one. Part two is that if someone initiates aggression against you, defined as force or fraud, you have the right to self-defense. That is a fundamental aspect of the non-aggression principle. So there's the two parts: your natural rights acknowledged, your ability to defend those rights. Mm-hmm. So that is fundamental, and that is basically the litmus by where libertarians, generally speaking, filter all concepts, whether or not it is an initiation of force or fraud. If it is, then we reject it. We don't engage in that behavior, and we have a right to self-defense. If it isn't, if it is voluntary human interaction and it's defined by active consent. We embrace it and we permit it. We don't necessarily have to allow it into our lives, onto our property, but you can do what you want to do over there, and I'll do what I do over here, and God bless you.
And that's a critical point, because we don't actually endorse any particular behavior. It's really, we endorse your ability to engage in the particular behavior that's important to you, again, as so long as it does not infringe upon those fundamental basic rights of other people. So how easy is it? And one of the things I found fascinating is the first time I got involved in campaigns, as a candidate, in a very interesting way, it's very easy to be a libertarian in one sense, because we view issues through that prism every day, don't we?
Yes.
And so take an issue that's really on the top of your list, and I don't know, and put it through that libertarian prism. I mean, how do you react to, say, what's on your mantra? What's your list of issues that you're really looking forward to addressing?
There's a couple of things that are pretty big. I mean, one of the fundamental things that I want to do running for this particular position as president is I want to curtail all of the powers that have been vested in the executive branch since its inception, and reduce it back down to the originally defined scope as is defined in the Constitution. Now, granted, I am a voluntarist, I'm an anarchist. Ideally, we would have no government. However, I recognize that most people want some concept, some sort of rules or established acceptable guidelines. And the one thing that we can all agree on, regardless of ideology, is that we love and lionize the Constitution, even if we totally destroy it by electing people who trample all over it.
Right.
So I want to reduce that role down to its originally defined scope. And in that concept, with that in mind, the things that I would address are primarily foreign affairs, international relations, how we deal with other countries, the military, immigration, and the welfare state, returning powers back to the states and ultimately to the individual where it belongs, things that are actually vested in the executive branch's really, truly defined authority.
Right. Particularly in recent weeks, and this is a culmination of events, as often happens, with the personal excesses of our current president, and again, I'm certainly not taking shots at George H.W. Bush, but what people were appalled by, not by him, and again, libertarians have some serious issues with his foreign policy record and his involvement in the CIA and other issues, but the term cult of the presidency has come up in a way that I haven't heard, because I'm older than you, that I haven't really heard since the Nixon administration, where we've got this reverence for an individual who really is supposed to be one of us. We didn't buy into a monarchy a couple hundred years ago, did we?
No, we totally eschewed it, theoretically, in the Revolutionary War.
How important is it to eliminate this cult of personality that surrounds each successive president? And I'm not diminishing the loss people may have felt with the passing of a particular historic figure, but are we supposed to go through this national catharsis when one of them passes, and is it supposed to be this overwhelming center of our public life? Was that what the founders intended?
No, absolutely not. I think basically what they wanted was to have people in the community who were respected and who you could trust and were, good individuals with good character to be functional representatives for them in a constitutional republic. They weren't looking for a king. They weren't looking for a god or a celebrity, though we have definitely, through the course of this repeated messaging and nationalism, basically put that president on a pedestal. Just the way that our government is structured and was originally designed, it was supposed to be equivalent in terms of legislature, judicial branch, and the executive branch.
Right.
They were supposed to be on par, and they function as checks and balances. The president was a functional figurehead, but he was never supposed to be better than all. So I think it would be incredibly important if we completely dispelled that myth, proved that the emperor has no clothes, and showed people, hey, this person is just like you, and if they're capable of taking self-ownership, then so are you. You own yourself. No one can speak for you better than yourself. So stop vesting your power in this person who doesn't know you and hasn't lived your experience. I think it would be incredibly empowering if we deflated that concept.
Right. I obviously I agree 100%. You know, the War Powers Act has made it into the news this week because, incredibly enough, and I'm still confused trying to figure it out. Somehow, entries to the War Power Act have been referenced as part of the Farm Bill.
That
Wow.
sounds about right.
I mean, in the words of the immortal, what could possibly go wrong? You talk about foreign policy, and that's, if you could explain the libertarian philosophy as foreign policy, because there's an attempt by one people to diminish us as, you know, that we just want to put our heads in the sand, that we're, you know, complete isolationists, and then of course there's other people who would betray us as weak. Explain your perspective on foreign policy through a libertarian viewpoint.
Okay. Well, I think that we still, despite the fact that we have adjusted our international relations theory concepts that undergird our foreign policy approach after 9/11, which is effectively this ill-defined global war on terror, we still essentially cling to the Wilsonian model of international relations, which is that we have to create this global political community. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that that's actually a very good concept. Personally, I absolutely abhor the UN. I think we should get out of it and we should kick them off our soil. That being said, we do live in a global economy. We do have a world that is interconnected because of technology and science, and it behooves us to have relationships with the rest of the world, but the best way to foster healthy relationships is through free market economics. We don't give favoritism, and we don't penalize. We just engage in free trade. And that is how we, develop healthy relationships with other countries. Unfortunately, our foreign policy approach has been terrible, just terrible. And we've created the situation that we're currently in. Had we not trifled in the Middle East in the 60s and 70s, we would never have encouraged that kind of blowback. And that was part and parcel with us adhering to this global hegemons, the United States and USSR, duking it out in this Cold War theory. We've created this, but at some point in time, you have to say, we're going to stop, full stop, we're done. We're not doing this anymore. We aren't going to keep fighting this fight because we should never have started it in the first place. Now let's try and establish healthy relationships. So that's my recommendation.
No, absolutely. And you see, and what's happened is so many issues have become entangled because ultimately now the war on drugs has commingled with the war on terror, which has now mixed in with the war on refugees. I had a guest on earlier tonight, and I always talk about how successfully we've offshored the production of narcotics, and yet somehow think, despite being one of the world's largest markets for narcotics, we somehow think that we're immune from the narco-terrorism that is directly analogous to, say, Chicago during the era of the Volstead Act. That somehow, that's beyond us. That's not our problem. So now you've got this crazy mix of the war on drugs mixing in with the, if you will, the war on refugees. What's your position as a libertarian on immigration?
Well, my feeling is that peaceful people should be able to traverse imaginary lines unencumbered. Nations are just political borders. It's land masses that we say, okay, from point A to point B, I put a flag on it, it's mine. People should be able to traverse those lines freely, provided, of course, they don't infringe on the natural rights of others. So, but because we are in a situation where we have a state that has created, has welfarism, and we are giving enormous amounts of benefits to people who are declared or deemed to be citizens, you have a lot of pushback from folks who feel like they're being taken advantage of by allowing these illegal immigrants to come into the country and take advantage of these services that should have been theoretically for them. Mm-hmm. The reality is that most people who are technically illegal immigrants, while they get fake Social Security cards and fake ID cards and do go on the payroll, they don't get those benefits back because in order to take those benefits, they would have to effectively out themselves as quote-unquote criminals and risk deportation. So they pay into a system that they don't typically benefit from. However, we still need to get rid of welfare, so I certainly believe that we should increase our immigration. Our naturalization process should be streamlined. We should allow people to pass borders. We shouldn't be so fearful of the other, because the other was our family 3 generations ago, and reduce welfarism at the same time.
Now, it's fascinating. Someone used an analogy, actually, ironically, in New Orleans at the convention, which I've just I cling to now, much to the annoyance of my friends who hear me talk about it all the time. But the analogy they use is that we're all floating on a rock that's traveling through space at high speed, and somehow that the benefits of life as a free person should be dictated by which side of that rock you happen to be spawned on, is ludicrous at best. And that's on its most simplest level. On an economic level, when you talk about American private universities being arguably the finest on the planet, and literally a magnet from some of the best minds on the planet, one wonders why one would try to fight that. Why one would take such a voracious attitude, and I, some people will talk about this era as the end of truth. I wonder sometimes if we're in our own moderated version of a cultural revolution, where we're trying to diminish the impact of quote unquote the intelligentsia, for lack of a better term, because they don't look like us. I'm continually confused by it. But if someone said the open border issue, I mean, you people believe in open borders, don't you? How would you? And that's going to be a question that you're going to get from the progressive left on the campaign trail up until Election Day. How would you respond to people like that?
Well, I believe in market borders. I believe in private property, and people have the ability to determine, based on private property, who they want on or off their property. But insofar as public lands goes, why are we making this mandate that some folks can and some folks can't? So that's my position on it.
Let's torture Republicans for a few minutes. Republicans would have you believe, and this is going to be critical in the election, because, again, my dream, if you will, is to have someone who can go out there in a I'll call it the Larry Sharpe method, who always talks about not having to argue and convince people, but by putting truth out there and allowing it to plant it like seeds. Republicans they're going to talk about open borders. They're going to talk about that threat. They're going to talk about us being weak on foreign policy, and they're also the architects, I believe, of the stupidest trade policy in recent American history. What do you say to a Republican who comes out to you and says, yeah, America, we showed them with these tariffs? What do you say to something like that?
What benefit is it to prosperity, peace, or progress to apply tariffs and preclude innovation from other nations to reach our borders? What benefit is it to our society to preclude individuals who could bring something different, new, and refreshing to our culture? All you're doing is creating a situation where you're effectively making an echo chamber where people are fed lies and live in fear and allow the state to encroach further on their lives. That's what I would say.
No, it's, when you look at the fiscal costs already, it's a study came out. I'm not sure if it was from Cato or not, but assessing in the opening weeks of the tariff trade law, a $32 billion cost to the nation's economy because of, quite frankly, us making it more difficult to buy inexpensive, innovative products. And there are different ways they came to that number. The simplest, of course, is in price increases. During the day, I work in the automobile industry, and let me tell you, it's going to be ugly soon. And automobile industry is a significant employer downstream of literally millions of Americans. And yet, one could almost say, when you look at this period of relative, it's quote unquote a boom in certain perspectives, certain parts of the economy. Why would we screw with it by introducing barriers to free trade and increasing the cost of production? I agree completely. I've worked in manufacturing for the past 10 years, and typically when there's going to be a rumble in the economy, you feel it there first, because you're starting with commodities and then it expands out there. Usually it's like oil and gas first, then commodities that are made from that, things off of mining, and then from there we feel it.
And I don't see any value or benefit into creating those situations. They're artificial, and they're it's like putting a finger in a dam instead of allowing the marketplace to achieve its natural ebb and flows. If we had a legitimate free market system, these huge peaks and vast valleys that we have to deal with because of these tampering with it would not be the case. People will pay for things that they want and won't pay for things they don't want. It is that simple, and it's the most democratic means of having your say.
Would you have bailed out General Motors and Chrysler?
Oh, hell no. Pivot or die. That's what I would say to any business. If you don't have a good business model or product, pivot or die.
So we're still paying for, in many respects, the cost basically in what we've done to our currency and what we've done by supporting manufacturing in forms of artificial competition in the marketplace that has neither created value nor wealth for anyone. Is there any role whatsoever in subsidies, corporate cronyism, bailouts in a Ruff administration?
Absolutely not. No. In fact, I know a lot of people are huge fans of Elon Musk, but he gets huge subsidies in order to do Tesla. If Tesla was truly a superior product, it would earn that money on its own. People would pay for that superior product. They wouldn't need subsidies from the government to keep them alive. If your business model stinks, if you have a bad product, if you don't provide the service people want, if you're a racist or a bigot, or you can't make a car whose bumper doesn't fall off, you don't deserve to get people's money, period.
Absolutely. The corporate cronyism is a big part of the mission of the Libertarian Party of Rhode Island, and we've had some successes on the ground here defeating these type of subsidies. But for so many people, it's just quote unquote a part of doing business. That it's just the way things are done, and you can almost see things are done in quotes and being capitalized. What's it going to take to get back? And understanding this, it's taken us 100 years to get here. Depending on your interpretation of foreign policy as Wilsonian, depending on your economic interventionism of the Roosevelt administration. So let's say it's taken us 75 years to get back here. How do you roll back? What do you do? Where do you start? The Ruff administration, you get inaugurated. What's the first thing you do? Is where do you start slicing and dicing at the departmental level?
Well, you stop putting lead in your wine. That would have helped the Romans.
Yeah, that's true.
But above and beyond that, I mean, it starts with you. You who gets elected into office. You who ends up putting those natural constraints that should be on your role and applying them there. Eliminating things that are beyond your scope, that should not be vested in your powers, and returning them back to where they belong. Respecting the organization of the system and not engaging in behavior above and beyond that. But more so than that, I think that it begins with the individual. It starts with us. Good government begins with us as individuals. If we conduct ourselves in an ethical way and with integrity, and we extend that to our families and the community, and we encourage paying attention to what's going on, fighting back, participating actively, and going after that low-hanging fruit of superfluous laws that we pretty much all can agree need to go, then we will trim the fat. I mean, you said it yourself, it has been 100 years of the making. And we are essentially going to take the socialist playbook, because it is cultural Marxism and socialism as played out this way, by going into academia and feeding kids these lies, and going into the legal system and completely dismantling the Jeffersonian model of jurisprudence. They have created the situation where we are now, where we're so far left, and we're vesting all our power in the federal government, that we're going to do the exact opposite thing. We're going to take their playbook, and like Ginger Rogers, we're going to dance backwards in heels.
Excellent. You bring up education. Is there any place in the world now for the Department of Education?
I beg your pardon?
Is there any place left for the Department of Education?
No.
Is that
no? I mean, it's absolutely essential that you have an educated public, but we are so blessed to live in the time that we do, in the sense that we have great access to the internet. And the internet, while it can be dark and full of terrors, as my Facebook feed has often been, it also has a glut of information. I was just talking about this the other night with Arvin Bora. There is no two people necessarily learn the same. Not everyone can adhere to that 7 hours a day in a stuffy classroom. You're going to read from this book and I'm going to write on the whiteboard. Mm-hmm. Not everybody learns that way. Some people are audiovisual people. I'm personally a reader. Others are hands-on. We need to allow, in order to have that sort of diversity, we need to take it out of the government's hands and permit private organizations and private individuals, parents and families and communities to teach their children how they think they need to be taught, what they need to be taught, and in a way that speaks to them and resonates with them. There is no value in having the government in education. All that does is teach the continual lie that government is necessary and it is good.
I always talk about that quaint little myth that exists, that there's this unwritten compact between the individual and between the government, whereas if the individual voluntarily sacrifices part of their own personal fortune, that government will introduce a level of fairness and competency into situations that might be dangerous, or in the words of the late president, wouldn't be prudent. Has the government demonstrated any capability to introduce quote-unquote fairness or competence ever in anything?
No, I don't think so at all. I would say that if you drill down on most government policies, it's either one of two things. It's either economic gain or oppression of a certain class of people. Mm-hmm. Everything is like that. The drug war is inherently racist. The drugs that they went after were specifically to target set groups of people who were, at that period of time in our history, the unwelcome other. Economic policies where you give subsidies or you end up penalizing other companies, it was largely for economic gain. It is either for power or for wealth and nothing else. And I think the cruelest thing that we do is that we play it off like it was done with good intentions, and it masquerades as a populist mandate. So that's probably the biggest problem.
Mm-hmm. What do you advocate now? Even if you're an anarchist, you mentioned that at this point in time, there needs to be some funding of government. As a libertarian, I'm a big believer in user fees, I guess. How do we all agree taxation is theft? That's just not a punchline. Delivered at our national convention. It's literally using the coercive force of government to separate one from one's personal property in order to fund objectives, programs that you want no part of. Therefore, it's theft. If someone is given money, quite frankly, it has to be taken away from someone. And that can occur in two ways, either by literally physically removing it in the form of taxes, or by reprinting a currency and watering down the value of the personal property that you and I own already. So it's very simple. It's theft. And on top of that, now you've got a government that sees, the Supreme Court that sees no problem whatsoever in using its powers of eminent domain to use it now for private personal investments of the many. How can a government, in your mind, fund the limited options and the limited behaviors that it, quote unquote, needs to engage in?
Well, there's a couple of different ways you could go about it. I mean, first of all, in business, when you're in a situation where you are not making your bottom line, you're not being profitable, you have a couple of options, which is you either sell more, which is to say that you get people to buy into, or in this case it would be take from the populace in taxes. You get rid of payroll, which means cut staff, cut agencies, cut individuals out of the government, or you would end up cutting overhead, which means like removing other departmental expenses or getting rid of programs. So since raising taxes is not an option, absolutely not, you would have to get rid of staff and you would have to reduce overhead, get rid of assets, start selling those things off and using that to offset the cost. We have so much money currently vested in our government in just assets that if we sold those off, we could use it to fund the things that we all generally agree or feel are necessary aspects of government. The rest of it could go. We are in a situation, though, however, and this is, again, going back to, this is 100 years in the making, where we have entire generations of people who have been raised into this mindset. And because of that, we have entire generations of people who are dependent on it. Government either negatively impacts you or positively impacts you in some way, shape, or form as an individual. Some people are taking government benefits. Other people are being penalized by, payroll taxes or business licenses or whatever. So what we would have to do is recognize that there are people who are beneficiaries and somewhat dependent on it, and then we would slowly wean them off of that dependency in order to prevent them from that shock that would create a vacuum in which other people could come in and manipulate their fear. So that's kind of my answer to that, is that we would get rid of assets that would help fund quite a bit and pay down our debt, and then we would recognize that some folks who are currently taking benefits need to be slowly weaned off of it so that they can adjust and get their sea legs.
Social Security.
Social Security is pretty easy. Anybody who's paid into it gets it back exactly what they got, and then we are done.
Just done.
We're done. Like, you paid into it, we calced it up, here's your check, sayonara. And then everybody else, we're done. We don't take those taxes out of your paycheck anymore, full stop.
Right. There is so many ample opportunities. So very often the left will say, well, what about those people who are incapable of, quote unquote, providing for themselves? There are so many organizations, both charitable and for-profit, that are so eager to provide services at that level to help people who need help planning for. I feel like, and I wonder your reaction to this statement, government has become so pervasive that in a large sense, the increased cost of government has forced families, regardless of how they're constituted, for one or both partners, if in fact there's partners, to have to engage in so much work to support this overarching government that we've effectively killed off the spirit of volunteerism in this country. Yep. Your thoughts on that and how you would react to that?
I think that's absolutely true. I read this really wonderful book by Jim Ostrowski, who's a lawyer in Buffalo and an author. He's a participant in the Libertarian Party in New York, and it's called Progressivism. And it talks about basically what progressivism is. And one of the things he said that resonated with me, and I never really heard this before, was that he said one aspect of it is that it is essentially a cure for our existing existential crisis. That people see some aspect of their world they don't like, such as, I see homelessness, and it kills me to see people who have no shelter, particularly when we live in inclement weather. And rather than doing the direct human action thing where I give them some money or a place to stay or warm clothing, or even the sort of by helping out a charitable organization and allowing them to do the direct human action aspect, I instead turn to the polls and elect someone so that I make it that we mandate everybody else chip in a little bit because I feel bad about this thing. My answer to any person who is liberal and says, but what about the children? Or what about homeless? Or what about these individuals who are unfortunate and suffer and need assistance is, what are you directly doing to help it? Stop telling me that I need to do because you feel bad about that. That's your responsibility. And I will, in turn, use the money you're not stealing from me and give to the things that are meaningful and important to me.
We're so often described as selfish, and I think immature. That's now. You and I have been enough of the same parties to understand that. We might go with that maturity issue thing. But
I'm kind of there.
But the selfish thing, I'm just going to reflect on some of the people that I've met in the movement. When I look at what some of the people down in Louisiana did in response to natural crises, when I look at how folks down in Louisiana and a couple of other cities have addressed the governmental attack on sex workers, when I look at the private charities that folks that you and I know in the movement have organized in a direct response to that ethos, if you will, that you and I subscribe to. I don't know anybody who's selfish in our party, and I don't know anyone who's gotten money from the Koch brothers. including, and I always say,
I could use some though.
if you're listening, Dave, we can be boys, all right? You know, but I just haven't seen any of that. But how as a candidate, it's so easy for the progressive left to dismiss us as selfish, you know, Newman. How do you're going to be on the campaign trail because we've only met briefly in real time, but you're the type of person, you're not going to hide behind anything. You're going to be out there, my sense is, to whatever degree possible, engaging with people in real time. You know? And so you're going to get all of this stuff, this crap thrown at you. And to me, the biggest disappointment of the last two elections, and I'm not here to take shots at anybody, all right? The biggest disappointment of the last election, that's why we only got a few minutes, but I want to get into the politics of this, was our failure, and I'll say the collective error, as a political movement, as a philosophy, as a party, to address those issues head on. And I know in Rhode Island, we're very aggressive about not letting people define us. And I think as a national movement, we let too many other political organizations define us for the public. What's the approach that you think you would take? You know, what do they say in history? As a national standard bearer, how would you approach it?
Well, one of the things that you mentioned is that people will be throwing a lot of things at me, and I've thought about it a lot because I am very much so a reticent politician. I'm not really comfortable in a face-forward position, but it's not about me, it's about the message. And with that in mind, if you speak truth to power and if you stand on principle, then you are totally untouchable. Mm-hmm. People will say whatever they want to say about us, but we're right. And we come from a philosophy that is inherently humanistic, and there's nothing pejorative about being selfish, because if you don't take care of yourself, you can't take care of anyone else. So this is the truth, capital T. And it's hard to hear, and I'm sorry, but I will tell it.
In your experience, both being a part of the Libertarian movement and as someone who's clearly well steeped in American history, has sidestepping any of these issues, has patronizing our opponents and trying to be more like them, has couching issues in language like, and I'll use to me something that I once embraced and now I find repugnant, that we are fiscally conservative and socially cool. That has you know, and this to me really sums it up. In the going on the 47-year history of this party, has playing by their rules, has apologizing for what we believe in, as being almost embarrassed to admit who we are, has that accomplished anything whatsoever for our movement?
No, it really hasn't. I mean, even the people who saw the gains made between Gary Johnson in 2012 and 2016, they're dealing with impartial data. So they're celebrating this, oh, look, we got 3 million more votes. And yeah, we got 3 million more votes, but we also had two of the most repugnant people running for office under the major party tickets. Isn't it possible that most of that was just people who are like, I'm fed up and a dead gorilla's not going to do.
Yeah.
You know, that's an aspect that they didn't even look at. But to hit the point, one of the things that I always maintain is, at the very end of Animal Farm, you have the line, and the animals looked from pig to man and man to pig and could not tell the difference. When you start to fashion yourself like the very thing that you're fighting against, pretty soon you become it. So either we're distinctly different or we failed again.
Just going to let that hang there for a minute. We are distinctly different. We are right. And I believe it's time to tell that story to the rest of the world.
I think so.
Wow. And it's really not that hard, is it?
No. You're here, I'm here. We've got tons of awesome people who are here. And They're broke because they work their butts off and they pay and put all their life and energy on the line because they realize there's a moral imperative. It is not that hard. We are fighting because we care. And it's our lives too.
And if I can co-opt a phrase from our progressive friends, it actually in its own way really is about the children, because things are so fundamentally wrong now that as someone who's a little bit older than you, there's a couple of us graybeards in the movement here, some who have been in the movement longer than, say, me, but I will probably need at some level to make sure that my children, who, by the way, I made Arvin almost teary at the convention. My children have never attended a day of public school.
He cries?
I saw him moistening. He was so excited. But it really is about future generations. We can continue to saddle them with debt on a physical level. On a spiritual level, we could continue to diminish the exceptionalism that this country once represented because it celebrated the rights of the individual. It didn't subsume them to the collective. We can continue to fail people internationally. I think we all agree right now we're not going to drone the Liberty into them, are we?
No.
we can continue that, or we can draw that famous line in the sand. And I'm convinced that the libertarian movement, and I pretend not to be an expert, that if we don't draw that line in the sand now, in anticipation of the up-and-coming titanic election that's about to take place, then I feel spiritually we're lost. And it really is at that dividing point.
Yeah.
2016 proved to us once and for all, and again, I love Gary Johnson. Huge fan. He's one of the reasons I'm here. I always tell the story. I was driving along in northern Massachusetts on a cold, cold night, and I'm listening to the radio, and some guy gets talking on the radio, and he's talking about running for president, and he's talking about self-ownership and individual rights, and blah, blah, and I'm like, who is this guy? So I call in, and Dan Ray who said, talk to our guest, Gary Johnson. That's why I'm here. And I know a lot of people don't see Gary as the most devout libertarian, but you know what? He's the reason I'm here. But it's time to step past that, recognize and embrace everything that Gary Johnson has done for the movement, everything he's done, look at all the positives, but build on that.
Right.
We can no longer settle. I refuse personally to settle anymore. I am not going to be content with anything other than a completely different way on how people in this country live their lives. And the way that they live their lives should be of their own choice. But I am not going to be content until people have that choice. And I don't think anybody in our movement should be content until people truly resume self-ownership and resume self-direction. And that's why I'm so grateful that you're jumping into this, because I'm convinced that it's voices like yours that have to be at the front now. Not in 2019, not in 2020, but now. Libertarians need to assert themselves and stop being afraid of being libertarian.
Right, absolutely.
So
we should all run. We really should. Every single one.
I know you're in the organizational stages of the campaign. Have you got a website up, or you're close to having a website up?
Very close. Yeah, we did a soft launch announcement in July and kind of carrying through, and then we're doing our hard launch January 1st. But our website is Ruff Phillips, PHILLIPS 2020.org. So ruffphillips2020.org.
Great stuff. And you're on Facebook at?
We are Kim Ruff / John Phillips for VP and POTUS 2020, I believe.
Excellent.
We also have a state page for every single, so Ruff Phillips, we have like Arkansas for Ruff Phillips 2020. Every single page, plus Puerto Rico, Liberland and and Namibia. We're very popular in Namibia.
And you know, Liberland calls out to me. Believe me. I'd love to get Mr. Phillips on sometime in the coming weeks, so we can have a similar conversation. I just want to thank you for coming on. I know it's a Friday and it's the holidays and all that, but you know, I admire you on a personal level, on a political level, and I have great admiration for what the journey you're embarking on. It's going to be a challenge, but damn it, it needs to be done. So
Thank you so much, Pat. I really appreciate you letting me be on your show. It's awesome.
All right, and if folks, it's going to be out there in perpetuity on Facebook Live land, so people can listen to you rapidly, and then they can point to the guy behind the screen and go, "Well, that's him." But you know, let's start the dialogue and let's keep it moving. Okay.
Right on. Thanks.
Fair enough. You've been listening to Kim Ruff. She is running for the presidency of the United States under the Libertarian banner. She is, as they say, that libertarian. She is, as I say, a libertarian fabulous. She is a radical libertarian. Radical is not a dirty word anymore. It shouldn't be. Radical means you simply believe in something. We had a party here in Rhode Island called the Moderate Party, which met its fate, if you will. There's no courage in being moderate, in trying to get along. When there's problems, there's profiles of courage. I mean, people stepping beyond their boundaries, stepping beyond their comfort zone, engaging, fighting. Yeah, that word fighting, yeah. It's not a bad thing. We are the Coalition, loud and proud, outrage-porn-free, civilly disobedient media broadcasting live on the Worldwide Coalition Network here at the GoLocalLive Broadcast Center. Tonight we had on several people who clearly, as our hashtag is, take it personally. I invite you to follow all of them. They all represent profiles of courage in each aspect of their life. They're willing to challenge the authority, as the bumper sticker used to say, but at the same time, they're rebels with a clue. CoalitionRadio.us